On the day Nathan and I got married, the plane trees outside the Civil Affairs Bureau had just sprouted new buds. There was no wedding ceremony, no white dress, no exchange of rings, and even that red background portrait was taken only because our mothers insisted on it. The photographer asked us to move closer. Nathan turned sideways, his shoulder against mine, with an expression as if he were posing for an ID photo. "Smile," the photographer said. The corners of his mouth twitched. I suppose that counted as a smile. Mine was about the same. After getting the certificate, he drove me back to the office. On the way, he said only one thing. "I'm moving in tonight." Okay. That was the entirety of the ritual for our marriage. That evening, our parents booked a private room at a nearby restaurant and threw together a wedding banquet. 6 people, 12 dishes, and we didn't even cut a cake. Yvonne, my only invited friend, sat beside me. Holding her drink, she said, "I wish you both happiness." Her eyes red, even more emotional than my mother. Come to think of it, the origin of this marriage was ridiculously simple. My mother and his mother worked in the same system, and after retiring, they became best friends through square dancing. One day, the 2 old ladies hit it off on WeChat and pushed each other's WeChat contacts to us. I had just been promoted to marketing manager at the time, and was so busy I barely touched the ground. The nagging calls to get married went from once a week to once a day. My mother's exact words were, "If you don't find someone to marry soon, your father and I won't be able to hold our heads up at work." Nathan's situation was pretty much the same. He later told me that his mother had directly stuffed blind date arrangements into his work schedule, marked in red, with the same priority as project deadlines. We met for the first time at a Cantonese restaurant. He wore a dark gray shirt with his cuffs buttoned neatly, and after sitting down, he poured me a cup of tea first. "Nathan," he said. "Emily," I said. Then there was nothing else to say. The meal lasted 40 minutes, and between us, we spoke no more than 20 sentences. But strangely, I didn't feel awkward. Perhaps we were both too exhausted. People numbed by the pressure to get married, sitting together in silence, actually shared a tacit understanding born of shared misery. On our second meeting, he asked directly, "What are your expectations for marriage?" I thought for a moment. "Just don't bother me, that's all." He nodded. "Same here." The third time we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Life after marriage was even quieter than I had imagined. We lived in the 2-bedroom apartment I had bought before the wedding, 1 room for each of us. He took the master bedroom and I took the secondary bedroom with a hallway that was never closed between us. Every day he got up first, and there would be brewed coffee in the kitchen. I got up half an hour later, and before leaving, I would close the door to his room. We were like roommates, tacitly observing the boundary of not disturbing each other. How little did he talk. Once I worked overtime until 11 and came home. The living room light was still on, and he was sitting on the sofa looking at his phone. He looked up at me. "You're back." Just 3 words. I answered and went back to my room to close the door. The next morning, a carton of warmed milk sat on the kitchen counter, with a note pressed underneath it that read, "Don't drink coffee if you have a bad stomach." His handwriting was so neat it looked like it was printed. I stared at it for a long while, then finally folded the note and tucked it into the drawer. It would be a lie to say I wasn't moved, but being moved and being in love are 2 different things, and I know the difference. Nathan always carried a faint scent of wood, not perfume, but something that seemed to come naturally from him. Sometimes when we passed each other in the hallway, that scent would drift over warm, heavy, like the evening breeze in late autumn. But I never asked him what he used. Just as he never asked me why I still kept photos from college in my phone album, candid shots on the basketball court, my profile dozing off by the window in the library, the silhouette of me playing guitar at the freshman welcome party. Those things I once thought were youth but later realized were obsession. Harrison. I rarely think of this name, but I have never truly forgotten it. For 4 years of college, I had a secret crush on him throughout my youth. The way he dribbled past opponents, the way he dozed off by the window, the way he squinted slightly while playing the guitar and singing. These images are carved into my bones, impossible to remove. We were never together. To be precise, he never even looked me in the eye. I was too quiet back then, quiet like a potted pot hose in the corner of the classroom, with a presence roughly equal to 0. He was always surrounded by beautiful, cheerful girls who dared to confess their feelings, while I only watched from afar, swallowing every word I wanted to say. Later he went abroad. Before leaving, he didn't even say goodbye. I only found out from a post where he shared a photo at the airport, captioned, "A new journey." That night, I drank most of a bottle of red wine and had a good cry. When I woke up the next day, I felt really foolish. Later on, my mom started pressuring me to get married, and I buried myself in work. Then I met Nathan. Life just went on like this. Plain stable like a glass of plain water. Not sweet, not bitter, as long as it quenches the thirst. Until that Friday afternoon, Yvonne sent me a message. "Emily, Harrison is back in the country. He wants to see you." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, motionless for a long time. Outside the window, the leaves of the plane trees have started to turn yellow. The phone screen dimmed, then lit up again. Yvonne sent another message. "Just consider it a chance to catch up. They specifically asked me to ask you." Yvonne and I were college roommates and we stayed in the same city after graduation. She is more outgoing than me and knows how to handle social situations. Her posts are always about exquisite afternoon teas and trendy internet-famous spots. At that wedding reception, she sat next to me, holding her drink with red-rimmed eyes, saying, "Finally, someone is taking care of you." I was quite touched at the time, but I knew she didn't really think much of Nathan. "What's so good about him?" "He's such a quiet one," she had told me privately. "You're so excellent. You deserve better." I didn't respond. What better meant I didn't know myself. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at a cafe called Floating Light, in the west of the city. When I arrived, Harrison was already sitting by the window. I hadn't seen him in 4 years and he had changed a lot. The fresh, youthful air he used to have was gone, replaced by an indescribable sleaziness. He wore an ill-fitting suit jacket, his hair combed immaculately, though his hairline had receded quite a bit compared to before. "Emily." He stood up, his smile a bit too bright and forced. "Long time no see. Long time no see." I sat down across from him. He called the waiter over, ordered a latte for me and a refill for himself. Then he started talking about how he was living it up abroad, about how he had several major projects in hand, about how he didn't want to come back, but there are more opportunities here. As he said all this, his eyes kept drifting over me, at my bag, my watch, the ring on my ring finger. "Married." He looked at the ring, his tone exaggerated. "Who's so lucky? We met through a blind date." "Oh," he drew out the sound. "So are you happy?" I paused for a moment, surprised by how direct his question was. "That's nice." He smiled and leaned forward. "Emily, to be honest, I came back this time because I wanted to find you." I picked up my coffee and took a sip, saying nothing. I left the country in too much of a rush back then, and didn't have a chance to say a proper goodbye to you. His gaze grew affectionate. "Actually, I've always remembered you. In college, you were always so quiet, especially different." I almost choked on my coffee. In 4 years of college, he never once looked me in the eye. I secretly went to the basketball court where he played, pretending to run into him by chance. I sat in the corner of the library he frequented just to watch him. At the freshman welcome party when he played the guitar, I stood at the very front of the crowd and clapped until my palms were red. He never noticed me. And now he's telling me I'm special? "Yvonne told me your husband isn't very affectionate." He lowered his voice as if sharing a secret. "If you're not happy, you can always—" "Harrison." I interrupted him. "Is there a reason you came back this time?" His expression stiffened for a moment, then he quickly resumed his warm smile. "Can't an old classmate just catch up without a reason? Catching up is just catching up." I set down my cup. "But some things don't need to be said." He stared at me for a few seconds, his smile slowly fading. "Emily, you've changed," he said, with a hint of disappointment in his tone. "You wouldn't have been this before." "This what?" He didn't respond, just stood up. "All right, let's meet another time then. By the way," he paused, "Yvonne is right, your life is too dull right now." With that, he turned and left. I sat there, watching his back disappear through the door, and suddenly felt a hollow space in my heart. It wasn't disappointment but an indescribable feeling. Like you always thought a box contained pearls, only to open it and find a few glass beads. The pearls were the filter you added, the glass beads were the reality. Time not only changes one's appearance but also corrodes the soul. I suddenly felt that the person I had a secret crush on throughout my 4 years of college never seemed to be the person standing before me. Walking out of the cafe, I sent Yvonne a message. "Done meeting." She replied instantly. "How was it? How was it? He's still that handsome, right?" I didn't reply. When I got home and pushed open the door, the house was quiet. Nathan hadn't come back yet. I changed my shoes and walked into the living room. An exquisite gift box sat on the coffee table, tied with a dark blue ribbon into a bow, with a note pressed next to it. I walked over and picked it up. It was in Nathan's handwriting. "Happy anniversary." Anniversary? I paused for a moment. Today is our first wedding anniversary. I actually forgot. I opened the box and inside lay a necklace. A slender silver chain with a teardrop-shaped gemstone pendant, blue with a hint of purple, shimmering with a cold light under the lamp. It was beautiful, but it wasn't my style. I never wear cool-tone jewelry. I prefer gold, something warmer. Nathan should know. All my earrings are gold. Why would he buy a necklace I would never wear? And this pendant? I stared at it, suddenly finding it familiar. Last month at Nathan's company annual party, I attended as his spouse. His female colleague, I think her name was Wendy, was wearing this exact style around her neck. At the time, she even made a point to greet me, smiling as she said, "Hello, sister-in-law. Nathan mentions you often." Nathan, you certainly sound close. I put the necklace back in the box, suddenly feeling a bit stifled. Maybe I'm overthinking it. He might just be not very good at picking gifts. Nathan came back later than usual that night. When he walked in, I was sitting on the sofa watching TV, though I wasn't really taking anything in. "You're back," I said. "Mm." He changed his shoes and walked toward the kitchen. "Have you eaten?" "I have." He nodded and opened the fridge to get some water. "That necklace," I began. "Did you buy it?" He paused, looked back at me and said, "Anniversary gift. Don't you like it?" "It's quite pretty," I said. "How did you know I wanted this style?" He didn't say anything. He took a sip of water before saying, "The shop assistant recommended it." "Which shop?" "That jewelry store that just opened at the mall," he said. "Why?" "Nothing," I smiled. "I just thought, it's not really something I'd usually wear." He glanced at me but didn't reply. After dinner I called Yvonne. "Yvonne, let me ask you something." "What's wrong?" "At Nathan's company, is there a female colleague named Wendy?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice came through, sounding a bit hesitant. "I think there is. Why do you ask?" "Nothing, I just saw her at the annual party and remembered." "Emily?" Yvonne's tone suddenly turned serious. "Did you discover something?" "No, just asking." After hanging up the phone, I sat on the balcony watching the traffic coming and going downstairs. The night breeze was a bit chilly. I didn't know what I was suspecting, nor did I know why I had this feeling. But that necklace was like a thorn stuck in my heart, impossible to pull out. Nathan was in the study with the door closed, busy with who knows what. We had been married for a year, and he had never given me any surprises. He would remember anniversaries and birthdays, but it was just a meal and a bouquet of flowers, passing them without much enthusiasm. This time he actually bought a necklace, an anniversary gift for his wife. But why do I feel that wasn't meant for me? Over the next few days I was like someone possessed. I stared blankly at my computer at work, was absent-minded during meetings, and even when colleagues spoke to me, they had to call my name twice before I reacted. My mind kept circling around one thing. Was that necklace really bought for me? I dug out the photos from the annual party day and looked through them one by one. Sure enough, in a group photo I saw Wendy. She was standing next to Nathan, wearing a necklace with a blue teardrop pendant. Exactly the same as the one on my coffee table. My heart instantly sank to the bottom. That night, I did something despicable even by my own standards. While Nathan was in the shower, I went through his phone. I knew the password, it was my birthday. That gave me a momentary sense of relief, but then I saw his chat history with Wendy. "Nathan, this necklace is so pretty. Thank you for helping me pick it out." Yeah, you've got good taste. Let's go shopping together next time? No thanks, I don't usually shop. Then next time I'll help you pick a gift for your sister-in-law. You definitely wouldn't know how to choose. All right. That's all. No ambiguity, no crossing the line. It could even be described as cold. But those 6 words, "Thank you for picking this for me," stabbed my heart precisely like a knife. The necklace was chosen by her. Even the gift he gave me was chosen by another woman. I turned off my phone and sat on the edge of the bed, my fingernails digging into my palms. The next day, I found an excuse to go near Nathan's office, wanting to see it with my own eyes. At 12 noon, I stood on the second floor of the mall across the street, looking down through the glass. Nathan came out of the company gate, and sure enough, Wendy was following him. She was wearing a floral dress, chattering nonstop as she walked beside him. He nodded occasionally, his face expressionless. When they reached the intersection, she suddenly tugged at his sleeve and pointed at the bubble tea shop across the street. He shook his head and walked alone toward the cafeteria. Wendy pouted where she stood, but soon she smiled and hurried after him. Watching this scene, I felt a mix of emotions. It wasn't exactly ambiguous, but it certainly wasn't the distance of ordinary colleagues either. Her gesture of pulling his sleeve was too natural as if she had done it many times before. Back home, I called Yvonne. Yvonne, I need you to look something up for me. Look what up? Nathan. What exactly is the relationship between him and that female colleague, Wendy? There was a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line, then she sighed. Emily, are you sure you want to look into this? What if you find out? I need to know the truth. All right. I have a friend at their company. I'll ask around for you. 2 days later, Yvonne got back to me. But it wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. My friend said that Wendy is indeed interested in Nathan and has been pursuing him for over 6 months. But Nathan never paid her any attention and has even rejected her outright. What about the necklace? The necklace? Yvonne paused. It is said that Wendy picked the style herself and Nathan paid for it. She originally wanted Nathan to give it to her. But Nathan said it was an anniversary gift for his wife, and he just asked her to help pick out a women's style. I was stunned. Wendy was quite unhappy at the time, saying, "You don't even know what your wife likes." Nathan said, "That's why I asked you to help pick it out." I opened my mouth, but for a long moment I couldn't get a word out. Emily? Are you still listening? I'm here. So, what are you planning to do? I don't know. I hung up the phone and sat on the sofa staring blankly. The necklace on the coffee table was still in its box, untouched. I reached out to open it and took another look at that blue teardrop pendant. Cold and unfeeling, indeed it didn't feel like something that belonged to me. But why did he ask Wendy to help pick it out? 'Cause he didn't know what I liked. We've been married for a year, and he doesn't even know I like gold jewelry. It's not that he doesn't care. It's that we've never had a conversation along the lines of, "Tell me what you want and I'll buy it for you." It's too polite. So polite that even giving gifts requires outside help. At this thought, my nose suddenly felt a bit sour. It wasn't grievance but guilt. That night, when Nathan came back, I was sitting in the living room waiting for him. He pushed the door open and paused slightly when he saw me. Still up? Nathan, I said. I know about the necklace. He paused for a moment, placed his keys in the entryway, and slowly walked over to sit across from me. What do you know? Wendy picked it out for you. I stared into his eyes. Why didn't you choose it yourself? He fell silent for a moment. I don't understand any of this. You can ask me. If I ask, it wouldn't be a gift. I was stumped. He lowered his head, clasping his hands on his knees as if gathering his thoughts. Nathan was usually a man of few words, and in moments like this he seemed even more awkward. Wendy. She's always had a thing for me, he said. I know. Then why did you let her help you pick a gift? Because she wouldn't let up. He paused. I've turned her down more than once, but she wouldn't listen. That day she dragged me to the mall, saying she'd help me pick an anniversary gift. I figured I had to buy one anyway, and having someone help is better than blindly buying it myself. But what she picked isn't my style at all. I see, he said, his voice a bit low. Later I realized that she chose the style she actually liked. I looked at him and suddenly asked the question that had been bottled up inside me. Why are you so polite to her? If you don't like her, just reject her directly. Why let her keep following you? Nathan's fingers tightened slightly. He didn't answer immediately, only speaking after a long while. Because I know all too well what it feels like to be a backup option. I froze. He looked up into my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, there was vulnerability in those eyes that were usually so calm, but it was quickly suppressed. Once I also liked someone. She was hot and cold with me, calling for me when she needed me and leaving me on the shelf when she didn't. I thought that as long as I was good enough, patient enough, she would eventually see me. Later I realized she never cared about me at all. He paused. I don't want anyone to experience that feeling again. So with Wendy, I wanted to reject her with dignity if possible. I didn't want to make things too hard for her. Watching him explain so awkwardly, watching him squeeze out those words he wasn't good at saying one by one, I suddenly felt as if something had slammed hard against my chest. This silent man hides a heart that has never let its guard down against me. It isn't that he doesn't care about me. He simply doesn't know how to care. Just as I didn't know he had been hurt before, didn't know his clumsy sincerity when buying the necklace, didn't know that he brews coffee every morning, leaves notes and warms the milk and sets it on the counter. These aren't roommates' courtesy. They are the only way he knows how to express himself. Nathan. I called him. He looked at me. I'm sorry. He shook his head and stood up. No need to apologize. It's my fault. He walked toward the study, took 2 steps and stopped again. With his back to me, his voice very soft. Emily, I might not be very good at being a husband, but I'm learning. The door closed softly. I sat on the sofa and the tears finally fell. Something quietly changed between me and Nathan after that conversation. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but rather like an undercurrent surging beneath the ice, calm on the surface while slowly melting underneath. He started asking me, "Are you tired today?" After dinner, he would take an extra look at my outfit before I left the house, and sometimes when I was working overtime in the living room at night, he would bring over a cup of hot water and leave immediately after setting it down. I asked him, "Why didn't you do this before?" He said, "I didn't know you needed it before." I paused for a moment then smiled. This man clumsily adorable. The incident happened on a Wednesday evening. Nathan was away on a business trip and wouldn't be back until the next day. I was home alone after work, curled up on the sofa watching a show. When my phone suddenly rang, it was Harrison. I hung up immediately. He called again and I hung up again. The third time I simply blocked him. 10 minutes later the doorbell rang. I walked to the door and glanced through the peephole. Harrison was standing outside looking rather unwell. I didn't open the door but asked through it, "How do you know I live here?" "Yvonne told me," he said from outside the door. "Emily, let's talk." "There's nothing to talk about. Just 10 minutes. His voice sounded a bit urgent. "I have something important to tell you." I ignored him and turned back to the living room. The doorbell rang and stopped and rang, continuing for about 5 minutes before falling silent. I thought he had left and just breathed a sigh of relief when I suddenly heard a noise from the balcony. I live on the 3rd floor, and there's a walkable ledge outside the balcony. I thought the design was quite unique when I bought the place, but now I realize how dangerous it is. Before I could react, Harrison had already climbed onto the balcony. "Emily." He stood outside the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at me through the glass. "Why are you avoiding me?" I took a step back, my hand reaching for the phone on the coffee table, wanting to call the police. "Don't." He seemed to see right through me and smiled. "I just want to talk to you." "Open the door." "Okay." "You're trespassing." "I can call the police." "Call the police?" He laughed. "Your husband isn't home. A man breaks into your house in the middle of the night. What do you think people will think when the police arrive?" My palms began to sweat. He was right. If this got out, it wouldn't do me any good. But he was clearly not acting normal right now. "Harrison, leave first." I tried to make my voice sound calm. "We can talk about this tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" He shook his head. "You won't see me tomorrow. Emily, I've waited for you all these years. You can't treat me like this." "Waited for you?" I sneered. When have you ever waited for me? Did you ever look at me properly during the 4 years of college? Did you say a word to me when you went abroad? Now you come back, find out I'm married, and only then think to look me up. His expression changed, his smile freezing on his face. You've changed. You weren't like this before. I was foolish before. I'm not foolish anymore. He stared at me for a moment, then suddenly reached out to pull the sliding door to the balcony. The door wasn't locked. I had forgotten to lock it after hanging clothes on the balcony earlier. As he pushed the door open and came in, I stepped back, retreating all the way to the edge of the sofa. My phone on the coffee table was just an arm's length away, and I reached for it. He grabbed my wrist. What are you doing? I tried to break free, but he was very strong, holding on tight and refusing to let go. Emily. His look became unfamiliar. Your husband isn't home. Let's have a chat, okay? Let go of me. What are you afraid of? He pressed closer. I'm your old classmate, we used to be so close. We're not close. I shouted, pushing him hard, but he didn't budge an inch. His face leaned in, reeking of alcohol, and my stomach churned. Harrison, you're drunk. I'm not drunk. His hand crept up my arm. Emily, do you know I came back this time for you? I've been thinking of you the whole time I was abroad. Thinking of how you look sitting in the corner back in college, so quiet, so... You're disgusting. I slapped him, but he dodged by turning his head. His face completely darkened. His smile vanished, replaced by a gloomy, terrifying expression. Emily, don't be ungrateful. His other hand pinned down my shoulder, pushing me onto the sofa. I struggled desperately, but the difference in strength between a man and a woman was too great. I couldn't break free at all. Help! I screamed, but he clamped his hand over my mouth. Don't scream. He lowered his voice. It's useless. Your husband is away on a business trip, and the neighbors are all asleep. Who can hear you? Tears streamed down my face. I regretted not installing security bars. I regretted not turning Harrison down flat the first time he asked me out. I regretted. The lock clicked. Someone was unlocking the door with the key. Harrison froze. The next second, the door was pushed open and Nathan stood in the doorway. He was wearing a dark gray trench coat and carrying a suitcase, evidently just back from the airport. His gaze swept across the living room and landed on us on the sofa, Harrison pinning me down, his hand still clamped over my mouth. In that instant, I saw something shatter in Nathan's eyes. He dropped his suitcase, closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed Harrison by the collar, and yanked me out from under him. Before anyone could react, his fist had already crashed into Harrison's face. Once, twice, 3 times. Dazed, Harrison recoiled, clutching his face, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth onto the floor. Nathan, you've lost your mind. The 4th blow sent Harrison crashing to the ground. Nathan didn't stop. He straddled Harrison, his fists raining down one after another. I had never seen him like this. The man who usually found even loud voices obnoxious was now like a maddened beast, every punch carrying the ferocity of wanting to tear his opponent apart. Nathan! I called out to him, my voice trembling, unable to shout loudly. He seemed unable to hear me. Harrison began to beg for mercy, but the fists didn't stop. The living room was filled with dull thuds, making one's heart tremble with fear. Nathan! I finally shouted aloud, rushing over to pull him back. Enough! He stopped. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving violently. Those eyes, usually so calm, were now filled with violence, as if he hadn't yet emerged from some state. Did he? His voice was incredibly hoarse. Did he? No. I grabbed his arm. No, you made it back in time. He stared at me for a few seconds, then slowly stood up from Harrison, turned and walked to the entryway, pulled a document bag from his trench coat pocket, and threw it in Harrison's face. Read it yourself. Harrison struggled to sit up, picked up the document bag and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. I glanced at them and saw words like debt collection, court summons, and marriage fraud. You owe $3 million in usury overseas and were chased by debt collectors until you fled back to your country to hide. Nathan stood there, looking down at him condescendingly. You tricked 2 women into fake marriages to help you pay off your debts, and then you ran. I have already sent this information to the people you owe, as well as to your company's HR. Harrison's face turned deathly pale. How did you? You thought I didn't know who you were? Nathan's voice was as cold as ice. Emily is my wife. If you had designs on her, you should have been prepared for me to dig up everything about you. He crouched down, grabbed Harrison by the collar and spoke softly, but every word was like a knife. Get lost. If I see you appear in front of her again, I won't guarantee that I'll just throw a few punches. He let go, and Harrison fell to the ground, scrambling and crawling toward the door. The moment the door closed, my legs gave out and I sank to the floor. Nathan walked over, crouched in front of me, and reached out as if to touch my face, but stopped in midair. His knuckles were still stained with blood, Harrison's blood. Don't be afraid, he said. It's over now. I looked at him and suddenly burst into tears. It wasn't fear, it was something else, the lingering shock, the relief, something inside me collapsing in a crash. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight, as if afraid I might run away. Emily. He called my name, his voice still hoarse. Are you okay? I shook my head and buried my face in his chest. His heartbeat was fast, faster than mine. How come you're back? I asked. Weren't you supposed to be tomorrow? Finished early, he said. Wanted to come back sooner. He paused. Wanted to see you. I looked up at him. His eyes were still red, but that violence had vanished, leaving only exhaustion and lingering fear. Nathan, I said. Thank you. He didn't speak, only holding me tighter. 3 days after the Harrison incident, Nathan placed a document in front of me. Take a look at this. I opened it to find several screenshots of chat logs and some transaction records. Glancing at them, I froze. They were the chat logs between Yvonne and Harrison. She definitely doesn't know about your debts, so don't worry, just go. Her husband is the tight-lipped type. He'll never find out. As long as you make her completely devoted to you, the money will be easy to handle. She must have some savings set aside. They've been married for a year. My hand started to tremble. Where did these come from? Harrison's phone, Nathan said. He left it behind when he fled. I recovered some of the data. I stared at the chat logs, my mind going blank. Yvonne, my college roommate, the friend who had teared up for me at that wedding banquet. She had been deceiving me from the very start. Why would she? Harrison is in a lot of debt. Nathan sat down across from me. He came back to the country wanting to find a wealthy woman to marry to help him pay off his debts. Yvonne scouted out targets for him, on the condition that she gets a cut once it's done. Scouted targets? You. Nathan looked at me. You aren't the only one. But she thought you'd be the easiest mark. Your husband doesn't cherish you, your life is dull. And you still have a crush you can't forget. I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. She has been driving a wedge between us. Nathan's voice was calm. Telling you I cheated, telling you Wendy was interested in me. Telling you that you should find someone better. She needed you to be disappointed in me. Needed you to feel that this marriage was meaningless. And then, my voice was dry. And then you would open the door to Harrison, he said. A neglected wife meets the man who once had a crush on her. What a perfect script. I closed my eyes. I thought of Yvonne crying even more bitterly than me at the wedding banquet. Of her always saying you deserve better. Of her telling me the moment she heard that Harrison was back in the country. Of her subtle attitude when she heard me suspect Nathan. So it had all been premeditated. How did you know? I asked. Why did you look into her? Nathan was silent for a moment. Because she was trying too hard. A friend who truly cares about you wouldn't keep badmouthing your husband right after you got married. The more she acted like that, the more something felt off. He paused. Besides, how did Harrison know your home address? He said Yvonne told him. But has Yvonne ever been to our house? I froze. No. Yvonne had never been to our house. She knew which complex I lived in, but she didn't know the specific unit number. She gave your address to Harrison, Nathan said. That night, it wasn't a coincidence. I sat there motionless for a long time. I didn't know what to say, nor how I was supposed to react. Anger? Disappointment? Numbness? Emily. Nathan called my name. I looked up at him. Are you okay? I shook my head then nodded. I don't know. It's just, I'm a bit tired. He didn't say anything. He stood up and walked over to me, placing his hand on my shoulder. It will pass. I watched his hand, suddenly recalling the way he brutally beat Harrison that night, recalling him saying wanted to see you, recalling his clumsy explanation for why he was being polite to Wendy. Nathan, I said. Why are you so good to me? He was silent for a moment. Because you are my wife. It was that simple. I smiled, my eyes feeling a bit hot. The next day I met up with Yvonne. Same cafe, same window seat. She was wearing a newly bought trench coat with exquisite makeup. And when she saw me, she waved and smiled. Emily, how have you been? I heard about what happened with Harrison. It scared me to death. Yvonne. I interrupted her. I know. Her smile stiffened for a moment. Know what? About you and Harrison. I pushed the document in front of her. See for yourself. She glanced down and her face instantly changed. Emily, this isn't, listen to me. Explain what? I looked at her. Explain why you sold me out to Harrison? Explain why you've been driving a wedge between my husband and me? Or explain why you gave my address to a swindler who's $3 million in debt? Her lips trembled and her eyes instantly reddened. Emily, I didn't mean to, I just what? I'm just jealous of you, she suddenly shouted. You have everything. A good job, a good husband, a good house, and I have nothing. Why do you get to live so well? I looked at her, feeling nothing at all. Yvonne, I said. My job is something I earned by working overtime and staying up late. My house was bought by me and my husband. I paused. Was just good luck on my part. But you have no right to destroy someone else's life just because you're jealous. I stood up and left the document on the table. Don't contact me anymore. Walking out of the cafe, I sent Nathan a message. What do you want for dinner tonight? I'll cook. He replied instantly. Anything is fine. I looked at those two words and smiled. That night I cooked 3 dishes and a soup. When Nathan came back, he stood at the kitchen door and watched for a while. Why are you cooking all of a sudden? I'm in a good mood. He didn't press further. He changed his clothes and came in to help serve the dishes. While we were eating, he suddenly said, There's an event at the company tomorrow, and family members can attend. What event? The rescheduled annual meeting. Last time you only came to the dinner, but this time there's team building. I thought for a moment. Okay. The next day was the team building, held at a resort in the suburbs. I followed Nathan to the venue and found Wendy there as well. She looked a bit unnatural when she saw me, but she still came over to greet me. Hello, sister-in-law. I nodded. She turned to Nathan. Nathan, let's be in the same group for the team activity later. Okay? Nathan didn't say anything and just glanced at me. I suddenly smiled and linked his arm. Sorry, he's with me. Wendy froze. Oh, then. All right. She forced a smile and turned away. Nathan looked down at me. You just. I was marking my territory, I said. Is that not allowed? He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. All right. After the team activity, someone started teasing. Nathan, your wife is so beautiful. Why didn't you bring her out sooner? Yeah, you really kept her well hidden. Nathan glanced at me, then suddenly reached out and put his arm around my waist. I'll bring her out often from now on. I paused for a moment then smiled. On the bus ride back, I leaned on his shoulder, watching the scenery fly by outside the window. Nathan. Let's get to know each other again. He looked down at me. What do you mean? Starting today, let's stop being roommates. He looked at me and didn't speak. Then he held my hand, interlacing our fingers. Okay. 3 months later, my dad was hospitalized. A heart problem. Not serious but requiring surgery. My mom's voice was trembling when she called. Emily, your dad. The doctor says he needs a stent. Can you come back? I immediately took time off and booked the earliest flight. Nathan went back with me. On the plane, I held his hand without speaking. He didn't ask either, just sat quietly beside me, occasionally handing me a cup of water. When we got to the hospital, my mom paused for a moment when she saw Nathan. Why are you here too? Aren't you busy with work? I took time off, he said. Emily is alone, so I'm keeping her company. My mom looked at him, then at me, and suddenly her eyes turned red. You two are doing well now, right? I nodded. We're doing well. The surgery went smoothly, but I needed to stay in the hospital for observation for a week. During that week, Nathan hardly ever left the hospital. Every morning he went to the cafeteria to buy breakfast and brought it to my ward. During the day he helped my mom with paperwork, picking up medicine and finding the doctor, and at night he sat with me in the corridor. Sometimes when I fell asleep from exhaustion, he would drape his jacket over me. My mom said to me privately, "Emily, your husband is much better than I expected." I smiled. Didn't you used to say he was a man of few words? What's wrong with being a man of few words? My mom sighed. He's dependable. Look at these past few days, he hasn't said much, but he's done everything. A man like that is truly reliable. On the day my dad was discharged from the hospital, Nathan drove us home. My dad sat in the back seat looking out the window when he suddenly said, "Nathan, thank you." Nathan kept his hands on the steering wheel and didn't look back, saying only, "You're welcome." My dad smiled and didn't say anything more. But I knew that was the first time he had truly accepted Nathan. On the flight back, Nathan asked me, "Are you tired?" "I'm not tired. With you here, I'm not tired." He glanced at me, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly, as if he wanted to smile but held it back. "Emily. If anything comes up later, tell me." "Okay." He held my hand and didn't say anything else. But I knew what those words meant. You are not alone, you have me. A week later was our 1.5-year wedding anniversary. Nathan said he wanted to go to the amusement park. The amusement park? I was a bit surprised. You didn't used to go to places like that, did you? "I'm not going," he said. "But you want to." I paused for a moment, then smiled. There weren't many people at the amusement park. He rode the carousel with me, took photos, ate ice cream, and we even played bumper cars. He drove very well, but I deliberately crashed into him and he laughed and let me win. In the evening, we went to the Ferris wheel. Rising slowly, I sat beside him, watching the city grow higher outside the window. The sunset dyed the entire city gold and red. The skyscrapers, streets, and traffic spread out beneath our feet. Boats moved on the distant river, and clouds drifted across the sky. "Does it look good?" he asked. "It looks good." He didn't speak, just looked out the window. When the Ferris wheel reached the highest point, the entire city lay beneath our feet, and the setting sun bathed the side of his face in a gentle light. Suddenly, I reached out and pressed his palm against my lower abdomen. He froze. "Emily." "Nathan," I said. "Our life from now on will probably be a bit noisier than it is now." He stared at me, his gaze shifting from confusion to surprise, and from surprise to, I don't know how to describe that expression, like ecstasy mixed with disbelief, like excitement mixed with the fear that it might be an illusion. You mean? Emichim. I nodded. It's been 2 months. His hand was still on my lower abdomen, but his fingers tightened slightly, as if trying to confirm something. Then he suddenly turned his head and buried his face in my shoulder. I didn't speak, I just held him. The Ferris wheel slowly descended, the sunset sank below the horizon, and the city lights came on one by one. His shoulders were trembling. I had never seen him like this, that silent man secure like a child, hiding all his emotions in my shoulder. "Nathan," I called him. He didn't look up, just said in a muffled voice, "I'm happy." Just 4 words. But I knew it was the most heartfelt thing he had ever said in his life. When the Ferris wheel landed, he finally raised his head. His eyes were still red, but he was smiling. He reached out and hugged me tightly, like he was holding something precious. "Emily," his voice a little hoarse, "thank you." "Thank me for what?" "Thank you for letting me be a father." I smiled, my eyes feeling a bit warm. "Nathan, thank you for letting me be a mother." On the way home, he held my hand the whole time. Fingers interlaced, never letting go. Streetlights flashed past the window one by one, his profile flickering between light and shadow. Looking at him, I suddenly thought of myself a year ago. Back then, I had just married him and felt that this marriage was nothing more than a piece of paper, a transaction where we took what we needed and didn't disturb each other. I thought our days would go on like this forever, plain, stable, and without waves. Later, Harrison returned. Yvonne sowed discord. The necklace caused a misunderstanding, and everything turned our lives upside down like a storm. But only after the storm passed did I realize that man I had always thought boring was actually the sharpest and warmest of all. He was silent because he wasn't good at expressing himself, distant because he had been hurt before, and clumsy because he was trying hard to learn how to love me. And I too was learning how to love him. The so-called falling in love after marriage has never been a blind impulse. It is two sober adults who, after seeing through the illusions of life and seeing each other's true selves, still decide to entrust the rest of their lives to one another and redeem each other. Nathan. I suddenly called his name. I love you. He paused for a moment, then turned his head to look at me. The streetlight's glow fell into his eyes, and something was flickering in those usually calm eyes. I love you too, he said. Just 6 words. But I knew that was the longest sentence he had ever spoken in his life. Outside the window, the city lights grew brighter. Before us lay a long road. But I knew that no matter how long or difficult it was, we would walk it together. Because we are each other's safe haven.